Sorry about that, I had a late breakfast. A broiled Ewok.
I don't think we've ever had a better introduction than that one, guys. That was wonderful. So welcome to FanX. Are you having a good time?
It's great to be here, yes I am. First time in Salt Lake City, won't be the last.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, we are going to jump right into questions because I know we got a lot of people wanting to ask questions. So let's go ahead and jump right into those questions.
Hello, as your character as the Emperor, were you ever discussed about were you trained as a youngling or as a Skywalker when you were older to become evil?
Well, that's an interesting question. Because, as you know, when I first entered the whole movie saga, I played the old Emperor who was 120. And then I got to play the Chancellor who was sort of the youngish Emperor who was about 50. But there's a whole period between 1 and 50 that we don't really know anything about. The only disappointing thing is when Disney does that saga, which they're bound to do, I'll be too old to play it.
Next question.
Okay, hi, my name is Brady, and this is Parker.
Hi guys.
We were curious if you could do a reboot of any movie ever, or TV show, what character would you play in that TV show or movie?
That's a very interesting question. I'd have to find someone who really was really good. Maybe you know who that might be. Who's the most virtuous character you've ever seen? Okay, one of these would be good. Because like most actors, you always want to do something completely different from anything you've done before. Nice question, thank you.
Excellent. Do you find that people, I mean, your voice and Morgan Freeman's voice are the most iconic voices. They're just like, they lull you. Do you get people all the time asking you to say things for them and all that?
They do, yeah, and James Earl Jones, of course.
Oh, of course.
The best voice of all. And the interesting thing about James is, I'm sure you know, I never got to hear his voice live because it was usually Dave Prowse, way up there above me, in a Bristolian accent. So I always used to have to imagine how James sounded. But one day I did get to meet him. I was at a play on Broadway, he came to see it. He came backstage, which was great, and he got on his knees. So I helped him up, which was kind of sweet of me, you know. I could have left him there, you know. But yes, no, people ask me to do the voice all the time, and they ask, you know, where does it come from? And I think it comes from deep within my gut, maybe even further down than that. But I once saw a great Japanese actor in a play, and actually it was a man playing a woman. He was playing, as some Japanese actors brilliantly do, he was playing Medea in the Greek play Medea. And I realized he produced his voice from somewhere down there. And I thought, well, if I could get to copy that, that might be a suitable voice for you-know-who. So that's how it all started.
Amazing, wonderful. Go ahead.
I play a video game where you have a power where you can fly around shooting lightning at people. We call it palpitating. So my question is there ever been a time, a situation where you wished you could go out and just palpatine things?
I have to be honest with you, don't I?
100%.
So the answer is a qualified yes. I mean, it would be nice, wouldn't it? If everyone had, now and again, just a little in their pinky, you know, nothing lethal, just a little bit of sort of prodding now and again. You know? But no, I've never really envied that power. And I sometimes joke when people ask me to do it, I'd say, well, I can't do it today because I forgot my charger.
Hi, I saw an interview that you did. You were talking about the Emperor's laugh. I was wondering how you actually came up with that, or how you developed it.
Well, it sort of comes from, it always comes from the pantomime, doesn't it? The villain always comes on and does something. So I tried to do that, but a bit deeper. Yeah. they wanted wild tracks, you know what these are, it's sort of recording bits of your voice so they can feed it in later at the appropriate moments in the movie. So I spent about half a morning doing things like that. Fortunately, it was a soundproof studio.
Next question.
Hi, I was wondering, with your background in studying psychology before you got into acting, how did that affect your character development of Senator Palpatine?
Yes, it's interesting to think if Palpatine had ever gone to a therapist. What would have happened? I don't know if they've been able to straighten him out. I can't honestly tell you honestly, that my background in clinical psychology helped the study of the Emperor, because I think he's sort of, as I hinted, I mean, he's beyond study, and I used to refer to him as just a solid block of evil, with nothing at all in his background except that. I mean, he came out of the womb. What a horrible thought. Whose womb might that have been? As a solid block of evil, you know. And then, of course, somebody wrote a book, and he seemed to have some kind of backstory, and even a Christian name. So that got me thinking. But of course, that's from the book, it's not from the movies. So I think the honest answer to your question is no.
Go ahead.
Out of all of the movies you've been in, which one was your favorite and why?
That's easy. It was Revenge of the Sith. Because that was the big transformation movie for the character. And I had a lot to do, and I got to play that great scene, and one of the best scenes I think George has written. I know he's often teased about his writing, but he surpassed himself in the scene at the opera when the old monster finally nails it with Anakin and gets him over to the dark side. It was a strange day, that, because I had a very busy day. We did different scenes in the morning. I did part of the fight scene with Mace, and then I did the transformation scene where my head changes, and I had to do quite a lot of shouting. And George kept saying, more, more. I said, do you not mean less, less? He went, no, more, more. And at the same time, people were driving wind machines towards me, the way they do, you know, in big studios. There's about 4 people behind these massive wind machines which come towards you so it can flick your hair and pan at the wig department. And also, I mean, studios are very clean places, you know, but there's always dust lying around. And it makes straight for your throat if the wind machines are blowing it in that direction. So when I started the scene in the opera, I was really quite hoarse. I was sort of like that. And I said, George, is this a good idea? Because my voice is a bit strange. He said, that's great, Ian. He's in transition. So, if you ever, and you may, watch that scene again, you know my voice is in transition.
That was an amazing impersonation of George Lucas, by the way.
Oh, was it? That was lucky. I hope nobody's recorded it. I'll be killed.
Go ahead.
Hi, honored to meet you. My question is, so in learning all about the backstory of Emperor Palpatine when you were doing the prequels, what was your experience learning all of that backstory and developing the character?
Well, it would be nice to say that I did that, but knowing George, you know, you just get told on the day, if you're lucky, what's going on. And when I met him for the prequels, wearing the same shirt, of course, he never changed it. He told me a little bit about it, and he said it would be great to have you back, and the character now is a straightforward politician, you know, just sort of hypocritical and greedy and you know, self-seeking, but we shouldn't show too much of that. Okay, fine. He said, but there's this other guy, and he started to describe what later became Darth Sidious. And I thought, oh, that sounds like a much more interesting part. And then on the first day of shooting, I got a script with my number on it, opposite the character called Darth Sidious, and I thought, I can't believe they've made this kind of mistake. You know, they're really efficient here. George would never allow this to have left the studio. And then suddenly I realized who I was and who I was becoming. But very few other people knew. The producer knew, George knew, and the crew got to work it out eventually. But one person who didn't know was Liam Neeson. And I remember at the premiere, he came up to me and went, "Yeah, it's you, you bastard." I'm very good at keeping a secret.
Another spot on impersonation.
All right, and he'll sue me too. It's all right, we're fellow Celts. We'll get out of it somehow.
Go ahead.
So Emperor Palpatine is such a scheming, evil character, which is what makes him so great. So what did you draw from for your portrayal of him? What was your inspiration?
Oh, just me, really. Actors always say that, you know. I don't know, it sort of came about slowly, because I got the job very quickly, as I'm sure you've read about and know. So I didn't have time to think too much about it, which was great in a way. But as the face took shape, and I had no idea what he'd look like. You know, they just said this involves a bit of makeup. And I thought, well, I know the guy is older than me, so that's good. But I didn't realize what the makeup would be like, and what I'd look like once I woke up, because they said, go to sleep, don't worry, it's best if your face is still. And I woke up and saw this monster, and of course I screamed. And then I thought, he looks reptilian, or like a really ugly, unpleasant toad. And that, and the thing I told you about earlier about the Japanese actor, was what led me towards the voice. You know, sort of. So it really, and it's unusual for me to work that way, but that's just the way it happened. Most of the, if inspiration is the word, for the character came from those kind of externals. And then there was the fun of the script, using words like friend as if they were the opposite. Because I thought, well, the Emperor doesn't have any friends, and he thinks people who have friends are weak. So he would use it with contempt. So things like that occurred to me as we went along, and I suppose the character, in a way, built itself.
Great question.
Okay. So one of the things that is amazing about Star Wars is the duels, like the legendary duel with Darth Maul and Obi-Wan, and my question is, what's your favorite duel that you've been a part of?
Well, my favorite is the one I watched, which was the one in Revenge of the Sith between Ewan and Hayden, because they were absolutely brilliant. They really worked hard, and Ewan, of course, had done fights in previous movies, and is really a master swordsman. And Hayden rapidly became one. And watching that scene, as I did on the day that they were filming, was extraordinary because they went through it every time. They did it about 30, maybe 40 times from different angles. And then, of course, I realized that you guys, the audience, would never really see that, because in the movie it has to be cut out between the other scenes. But the sustaining part of that fight was as good as anything Errol Flynn ever did. So I was really in awe of that kind of skill. In fact, I said to them both they should take it on the road. It would be a sensation. They were busy doing other things. But I had to learn a bit of that, as you probably realize. But most of my apparently skillful stuff was done by a very skillful stunt double who even looked like me, which is so unusual. So he should take most of the credit for that. But I did do a bit with Sam, and he was very patient.
Go ahead. Mr. McDiarmid, it's an honor and a pleasure to meet you. My question is, with so many years between episode 6 and episode 1, what were your thoughts and feelings, and how difficult was it to reprise your role of Palpatine?
Well, of course, I assumed I was done. You know, I was invited to do Return of the Jedi, which is great. I had no idea that George would be going backwards and do the prequels. And frankly, at that time, I don't think it was very much in his head either. But because Vader was such a phenomenal villain and conquered the world in a sense, I think he thought it would be a good idea to tell his backstory. So obviously, in some way, I was going to be part of it, and there would be the moment when the Emperor persuaded him to join him. But as I say, the day I met George again, I mean, I'd heard he was doing the prequels, and I'd no idea what my involvement would be and the extent of it. So it was a continuing saga. And as I said, I didn't know what would happen in Attack of the Clones, and I certainly didn't know how it would be resolved in Revenge of the Sith. But it was a great thing to go in when you're 37 and play a 120-year-old, and then to go backwards in time and play a 50-something-year-old when you were 50-something. I'd never done that before. And then to become 120 again, if that's what happens. But I don't know, age was never really a very important thing to George. It was what happened to the character. And I suppose that the more hideous the face got, the stronger the evil was. That was what he was most interested in.
You know the scene where Hayden turns on his lightsaber, Anakin, with the young Padawans, and it startles him. It's such an emotional scene. Do you ever feel a little guilty?
Well, I'm sorry, but it was all my fault. I mean, the Emperor's, I mean. Yes, execute Order 66. I said, George, are you sure? And he said, do it.
Excellent.
I think it was all a little more gruesome than you ended up seeing. You know, a lot of young potential Jedi ended up on the cutting room floor. It's probably a good idea, you know, had to get a certificate, you know. On the other hand, George says that's what he's like, this guy. He's uncompromising. People should know it.
In Return of the Jedi, you have so much range from very, very small all the way to fully armed and open, shut up. You know, it's so
Very good.
big. And then there are other times he almost seems kindly. How did you determine how big you were going to go, or how subtle, how restrained from moment to moment?
Yeah, well, you sort of, I mean, that's the phrase. You sort of play it moment to moment in the hope that, you know, when it's pieced together, it'll all make some kind of sense. I mean, on the big, it makes me laugh to think of it now, on the big transformation scene where he screams, don't worry, I'm not going to do it now, unlimited power. When I thought, this is much too much, really. It's a movie, you know. It's not a gigantic auditorium like this one, where I could probably do something like that without a microphone. But George, I'm not going to. But George, no. I'm too expensive. But George said, no, it'll take it. I'm not sure if he was entirely right, but anyway, I gave him what he wanted, and I went beyond the top, over the top, and on the other side. So.
But it's amazing though, because in the Phantom Menace, at the very end of the movie, when you just put your hands on Anakin's shoulders,
Yes.
it's so subtle, but yet so evil at that moment. It was incredible.
George decided later on to include that scene. He wasn't going to have him meet the young boy at all. And we did it on one sunny day in London, in the back lot, really. I remember I was more worried about how my wig would look like under daylight, and I had reason to be, than anything else. But he said, just, you know, he's just a nice kid, just say hi. So I just said hi, and there was a little suggestion of what most people knew was to come. But that's again, you know, what's good about George. You know, he didn't want me to. Whereas in the big scene, he wanted me to go very far. As you say, in this scene, he wanted it to be really hidden, really subtle. Go ahead.
Hi, so Palpatine is bone-chillingly perfect, but I'd like to know more about your work with Shakespeare, and especially why you think Shakespeare still matters 400 plus years later.
That's very interesting. You should ask that question now, because I had a conversation at breakfast this morning with a very good friend of mine who isn't into Shakespeare. It doesn't sort of get it, and he finds it, and I don't blame him. A lot of people find this difficult to understand because the language is, Elizabethan, Jacobean. It's not the way we speak now. And our job as actors is to try and make it sound as if we're speaking and thinking now, even though the language is of the past. And that's a big challenge. And often we fail, and often we're boring. Often productions of Shakespeare are really boring, and I've been in a few, I can tell you. But the aim is always to try and reinterpret it, make it live once again for the 21st century. And Shakespeare, in a sense, has done that already because his themes are universal, and his ideas are, quite extraordinary. He clearly was. There's a very good book just out by Stephen Greenblatt, an American writer, relating some of Shakespeare's plays, history plays, to the present day, and he makes a very good case for the parallels. And we who act them now and again should really do our damnedest to make sure we can make those parallels too, without making it seem silly and anachronistic. You don't have to wear funny hats or add hair pieces to be relevant. You can find other ways. But I think Shakespeare lives. If I had to have a T-shirt with something on it, that would be the one I'd choose.
Shakespeare influence your way that you spoke with as the emperor, because you have that iambic pentameter and that staccato speech.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's more to do with rhythm than everything else, but you're right, the rhythm, of course, is contained by iambic pentameter. I think a lot of actors are slightly intimidated by that, but the thing about iambic pentameter, it is by and large the rhythms of, well, if you're British anyway, the rhythms of everyday speech. So it only doesn't work when people get nervously caught up in the fact that somehow they should be speaking poetry. If they just relax and let the language do it to them, rather than them doing it to it, it more often than not works. But young actors need to be encouraged not to be intimidated by it, and to really go there, and I try and do a bit of that when I can.
Good, excellent.
Good. My name is Hayden, and this is my apprentice, Elijah.
Hi.
We were wondering what was it like to work with Hayden Christensen and Christopher Lee?
Yeah, well, great in both cases. Christopher was a sort of god to me, kind of icon. I remember when I first saw his Dracula, I thought that's marvelous acting. And so I was very thrilled to be in the same room with him. And he was a great guy, and he was if he hadn't been an actor, he would have been an opera singer. I think he would have preferred to be. And he had a wonderful bass baritone. And I used to share the adjoining dressing room to him. And in the morning, he would be warming up by singing an aria from Boris Godunov or something like that, which was great. And his voice is deeper than mine. So I was in admiration of that. And he also used to tell wonderful stories. And Hayden, young actor, one of the finest young actors I've met, a great guy, a good pal. And it was tremendous working with him. I wish we'd had more time to work together. But again, as I said earlier, sometimes being in the moment can do it to you. And that day, when we did the scene in the opera, it was late on a Friday in Australia. People are thinking about the weekend. The first AD was having a birthday, and a certain gold gentleman was rattling glasses and preparing champagne in the corner. So it was, and the producer's mobile phone went off about 20 times. So it wasn't the ideal atmosphere for concentration. And the camera was going to be on me for the rest of the day, and then we'd switch around to Hayden on Monday. And George said, listen, don't worry if you need a line, just call for it, but don't stop. And, if your voice really does give out, we can do it again on Monday. But we did 20 takes, and I got through them all. And one of the main reasons was Hayden's wonderful concentration on the other side of the camera. And as people always say, quite rightly in movies, it's not just you acting, it's the other person listening that gives you the juice.
Hello. I would just like to know, what exactly is the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
And I would like to know that too.
Next question.
Okay, so Emperor Palpatine is one of my favorite villains. He has done what no villain has ever done. He's like ruling both sides, basically. Where do you think he gets it, and who is your favorite villain?
Yeah, I don't know where he gets it from, but I don't think we want to know, really, do we? Where does he get it from? I don't know. As I said earlier on, I just think he's a solid block of evil. I think he's sort of, the dark side to him is the essence of his being. There are people say other people like that around these days, and I say I don't think there is such a thing as a solid block of evil, but there are a number of people who are probably chipping their way towards it, but we won't mention any names.
So on the internet, there's this site called Reddit, and there's a community on there entirely based around pictures of the prequels or GIFs with captions. And your face is actually like the thumbnail for this community. Have you ever heard of it, or?
No, I haven't. Like everybody else, I've got a phone and I'm on the internet. But, I take this opportunity to make it clear, I don't have any social media accounts. So if you think you're contacting me on Facebook and Twitter or any other site, you're not. It's all of these people pretending to be me, which is kind of odd, but in a way a kind of tribute to. But no, it's if you come across apparently me on social media, it's not me.
So just to be clear, the Emperor doesn't do social media.
The Emperor does. He's never off it. But hey, it's a gift to the Emperor, Yeah, he runs, he hacks, he just gets into unprotected sites. He does all of that, I'm sure. But not me. So, although, I've got a phone in my pocket, I'm not totally ignorant.
Hi. So my question is with the bringing back of Peter Cushing in Rogue One, have you had any talks or thought about if they want to bring back the Emperor and you're not able to come in?
Dead, you mean?
Yeah.
Say it.
Yeah. Have you thought about how you want them to bring you back?
That's really funny. Isn't it wonderful to be invited to consider your resurrection? That never even happened to Jesus. I don't have any thoughts about that, but I thought that they recreated Peter with the consent of his family brilliantly in Rogue One. And I was also very selfishly interested to see that the Emperor got about 20 mentions. Just an acknowledgement of the power. And of course, one of the great things about New Hope is you never see the Emperor. This figure is talked about and represented by the late, great Peter Cushing. It's wonderful what they can do. But once again, apart from creating the face, they had a very good actor, a very good British actor, to recreate the voice. So it wasn't just a piece of digital trickery. Acting was involved. So if ever they brought my character back when I was no longer around to sue them, I hope they'd do a good face. They could improve on my face. It is improvable. And get a great actor to do the voice.
So my question is, in
Return of the Jedi, I've heard that they didn't have a motor for your chair, and so you had to like scoot yourself around. Is this true?
Yeah. That's why I was a little disappointed this wasn't the swiveler. Because I thought that question might come up and I could have demonstrated. However, I can probably demonstrate. No, it was, of course it was a motorized chair. And the only problem with was it didn't stop exactly on the mark. And in movies you have to be on your mark. And that doesn't mean either side of it. So we had a few tries and it never worked. And it frustrated the cinematographer and everybody else who was trying to get it right. And so I volunteered to do it with my feet. And as the camera was there, my feet weren't seen. And of course the robe hid them anyway. So, with great dignity and solid block of people in mind, I went on like this. Every time. And when we came to do Revenge of the Sith, and the chair arrived again, and I said, George, are you going to motorize it, or should I? And he said, do it. So I did.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to know, and I'm hoping we agree on this, what is your favorite Shakespeare play to perform? Also, Hail to the Empire.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Well, the one I haven't, I've done it on the radio, but the one I haven't performed yet is the answer, the sincere answer. Maybe one day, King Lear. I like it more. My favorite, I suppose, is Henry IV's parts 1 and 2, because there's a real development in that play, and it's interesting to see how a young king who's full of spirit and adventure, like everybody else when they're a kid, likes to go out and have a good time, and then wises up when he becomes king, and puts all that behind him. It's a very interesting study in gradations of power, which Shakespeare's very, very good at. But so is King Lear. But the problem is there are so many King Lears around, I feel sorry for audiences, there's not another King Lear. And some very good ones. Ian McKellen is doing a great King Lear in London as we speak. And the marvelous Glenda Jackson, who played it in London, yes, the part of King Lear at the Old Vic, is going to reprise it on Broadway. So I can't wait to see that. She'll be fantastic. She said a very interesting thing in an interview, and I think the Emperor's a bit like this too. She was asked, she said, the great thing when I did the performance in London, for which she won an Olivier Award, nobody ever talked about me as a woman playing a man. They just accepted it. And the interviewer said, why do you think that was? And she said, well, as people get really old, and actually she's probably the same age as the king is supposed to be in the play, gender becomes less of an issue, and there's a kind of morphing of the male and the female, and I thought that was really interesting. And also the look of the Emperor when I first saw him. I think George alluded to this. You wouldn't really know till he opened his mouth whether he was a man or he's frizzled and aged, a man or a woman. Until he characterized himself. But if I ever get the chance to play King Lear, before I'm 82 preferably, I'll certainly play it as a man.
I kind of want to just point something out to you. We've had these panels, this is the 10th one we've done. You're the only celebrity we've had that at the end of every answer, there's polite applause. Every time. I can't tell if it's fear or respect.
It'll be fear. No, it's fear, it's fear.
Every question is
You're very generous. This is a very generous country. Actually, Glenda said, who won the Tony, for a magnificent performance in an American play, Three Tall Women by Edward Albee. She said, I'm constantly, she doesn't waste words, I'm constantly overwhelmed by the generosity of American audiences, and that's been my experience too.
Go ahead.
Okay, first thing is, I'm not afraid of the Sith Lord.
Oh really? We'll see about that.
And I have a debate for you to settle. Emperor Palpatine versus Voldemort versus Sauron. Who wins? What happens?
I think you know the answer, don't you? I would like to say Palpatine never loses, but you know, he did get sent down that chute to universal hell, presumably. But apart from that, he was a winner.
We have a little one.
What was your first acting job?
That's an interesting one. Well, I was at school, and in what we would have called primary 7. Yeah, I was between 10 and 11 years old, and the class was going to perform a mime to the great Australian song "Waltzing Matilda," which is about a tramp. I won't tell you the story, you know, it'll take all my life. But eventually he ends up in a water hole, and there's a sheep and things like that. Anyway, they were auditioning for the part of the tramp, and I was a very shy kid. And they said, okay, anybody who wants to audition for this, you know, form a line over there, and we'll see you all. And I found it seemed independently of me, my arm shot up. And I wasn't a great volunteer, and it did. And I auditioned, and I got the part. And so then we came to perform it before the school at the end of term. And the water hole, which he has to dive into, was a rubber dinghy, of course. And the final line, I think, of the song, or his final line is, "You'll never take me alive," said he. So on that, it's a mime, remember. I used to come up from the water hole, you know, doing that kind of salute. And Leslie Davidson, who was a girl in my class, who I remember I quite fancied at the time, bad for 11, she was in the front row, and she said, "Oh look, Ian McDiarmid's got constipation." That was my first review. I've never read them after that.
So besides the Emperor, who's your favorite character in Star Wars?
Oh, yeah. Well, it has to be Anakin, really, doesn't it? But there are so many, aren't there? It's certainly not Yoda. Anyway, we know he's not real. He's either Frank doing a puppet or something created digitally, you know, so... yeah, I think it has to be Anakin, because it's his progression. The whole film is about his progression, which is kind of Shakespearean progression. Because, you know, the Shakespearean hero, in inverted commas, always has a fatal flaw that prevents him from achieving greatness. And that's the Anakin story. So that's why I like him the best.
Great question.
Purely taking yourself out of your role as an actor in the Star Wars films, and going into the theater purely as a viewer, which was your favorite or most rewarding Star Wars film to see yourself in?
Well, I didn't really see myself in it to begin with, although I ended up in it. And the answer to your question is The Empire Strikes Back. That's the most narratively engaging movie, I think. That's the one that really has you on, or me anyway, on the edge of your seat.
Great question.
Hi, Ian. I loved you in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. What was it like working with Michael Caine and Steve Martin?
It was great. It was very unusual because we were in sunny France. We all stayed in Nice or thereabouts, so it was really very nice locations. And again, it was a part that came to me very late on. But it was great working with Michael and Steve. On the first day, I think Steve confused me with a reporter from the Times newspaper who come out to interview him. So I was sort of immediately in a Steve Martin situation. But he was talking to me as one person, I was trying to tell him I was another. He also, I think he wasn't allowed to say it at the time, but he was responsible for quite a lot of that script. And he gave me some of the best lines to say. Two of them I can particularly remember. I suppose my favorite one was Welcome to Hell. It's amazing what you can do with a good line. I know you're surprised at that. And the other one was towards the end, when all I had to say was, "Oh, shut up." That's typical Steve. I remember that there used to be a ventriloquist act in England. It's a guy called Savine, who had a puppet. He had a young girl puppet called Daisy May. He had a dog, and he had a real dog who came onto the stage every now and then and looked at him and said, "Oh, shut up." So I remember that dog when I did the line. But yeah, it was a very good, fun time. I got to drive a Rolls Royce for about 2 seconds, which was about the right length of time to give me a Rolls Royce. So that was an added bonus.
Excellent. We have time for one more question.
Hi, Ian. First off, you were absolutely legendary. I love you.
You love me? I failed.
So you and Christopher Lee were some of the more experienced members of...
Older, he means.
I didn't say that.
No, I saw your eyes.
So I want to know what it was like for you guys to learn your choreography for the lightsaber battles. Like, was it physically challenging?
Well,
did you enjoy learning it?
Well, it was certainly physically challenging to me, yes, but I knew that it was mostly done by somebody else, so I didn't worry about it too much. But it was interesting to do, and I took lessons and turned up. I had to do the moves, of course, because George wanted my face, close, and half body all the way through the fight, even though I wouldn't necessarily be fighting. So I had to know what was happening when, and that was interesting. And I used the phrase master swordsman about Ewan and Hayden, but Christopher was certainly that. But unfortunately, he wasn't able to do very much of it anymore. So again, he had someone who worked for him. But what he did most effectively was show you how to handle a sword, how to stand when you're using it, and all the rest of it. But because he was, of the age he was, he didn't do too much fighting. And I didn't do too much fighting either, because I wasn't very good.
Everybody, can you give a huge round of applause